Okay, so here we have the brand new, just announced Sigma FPL camera. This is a compact full frame camera. I mean, it's freaking tiny. What in leads today. So yeah, we're gonna test out what this camera is all about. First impressions on the Sigma FPL, and I have to say, I find it really impressive how small this camera is. Now, I get that the Sigma FP is the original small, compact, full-frame mirrorless camera. However, it's the first time that I'm handling one of these types of cameras, and I find it quite remarkable. I mean, it's got a huge sensor, relatively speaking. It's got a full frame sensor in a camera body that's smaller than an APS-C mirrorless camera like the Fuji X-T3. And I just find that ridiculous, especially considering how high the resolution is of this new camera. The biggest feature or the biggest change is the sensor, because this is now a 61 megapixel full frame interchangeable compact camera, and I just think that's amazing. So you've got a ridiculous amount of resolution available in a camera that essentially fits in your pocket. Granted, the ergonomics suck, like they're pretty poor because it doesn't even have a grip on it, but what I found is when we're walking around, if we just hold it by the lens, it's relatively fine. But first few impressions on this camera, definitely impressed. Image quality wise, it does look good, but we're going to be exploring that in a little bit more detail. But yeah, definitely impressed so far with the Sigma FPL. Okay, so we've been shooting with the Sigma FPL for a few hours now, and although this is not a full review, this is just a hands-on look at the camera, our first hands-on look at the camera, there are a few things that we've noticed, and the first thing is autofocus. Autofocus in this camera, not that great, could be better. I mean, it is a £2,000 camera, so probably unfair for us to compare it to some of the more premium flagship mirrorless cameras from Sony and Canon. However, I think that if companies like Sigma, Panasonic and Leica started implementing phase detect into their sensors, that would make a huge difference to the overall performance. The eye detect and phase detect features are good, a little bit hit and miss, and also even with obvious subjects in the frame, it can be a bit hit and miss. So autofocus is good, just not that great. Second thing is battery life. Battery life isn't that great either. I mean, it's a relatively small battery, small body, small battery. Battery life is similar in performance like a Fuji X-T3. Okay at best. However, you can charge it through the USB-C port, so if you did want to extend the battery life, you can just use a power bank, and that would give you more battery life without having to change the batteries. So plus and minuses there. Finally, the EVF. Now, the camera itself doesn't have an EVF built in, but you can attach this thing onto the side. So as much as I love the EVF, because you've got this fully tilting feature there, and you can have the viewfinder pointed directly up, so you can use it almost like a waist level type of camera. Attaching this to the camera is such a pain. It doesn't just slot in. It looks like it's going to slot in, but it doesn't. It's honestly such a pain fitting this onto the camera. And also, there's no sensor on the viewfinder, meaning that you have to use this switch to go back and forth between the viewfinder and the LCD, which can get in the way a little when you're out shooting, or if you want to just, if you're just kind of in the zone and you just want to be able to go back and forth. Most cameras, like the Fuji and the Sony that we're shooting with, they've got sensors in the viewfinder, so when you bring your eye up to the viewfinder, it automatically switches from the LCD to the viewfinder. But other than that, I really, really like this viewfinder. Quality is great. The usability factors in terms of the tilting features are great. However, quite cumbersome, just seems like an afterthought in terms of the way it attaches on. But yeah, I have to say, useful, just a little bit cumbersome. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at the images from the Sigma in more controlled environments, and we're going to be testing the sensor, dynamic range and so on and so forth. It's not a full review, but we're going to be looking at certain aspects about the sensor and what kind of image quality you can expect from this. So here we have some images opened up in Lightroom, and this first image that we're looking at is one that I took of Annette whilst we were out in Leeds. This is a DNG file, so essentially a raw file from the camera, and we shot it using the one of the newer small compact primes that Sigma produced for the FP series of cameras. So it's the 45 f2.8. One of the things that I struggled with the Sigma was that autofocus was a little bit hit and miss. Now, there might be some amount of motion blur, but we did shoot this at a very fast shutter speed considering that Annette was just standing still. So, you know, focus is just one of those things that this camera really struggled with. You can see that it's front focused on her coat instead of on her face, and this is something that we came up against quite a lot. The other problem is because this camera, you know, it wasn't a pre-production model as far as I'm aware, because we were able to use it and take pictures and so on and so forth, but you know, it is a camera that hasn't been released whilst we're filming this, so it doesn't have any color profiles in Lightroom, and the colors were, well, they were okay. So, you know, I've adjusted the white balance so it looks fine, but I think that the color profiles inside the camera, they're much better, especially powder blue. Powder blue is one of the new color profiles, and we're going to be looking at that in a moment, but I really love that color profile, but it only impacts the JPEGs. You can't have it on the DNG files, and you can't obviously apply it in post either, so bit of a pain there. The second image of Annette, I managed to focus more correctly, and you know, the lens is not the sharpest lens that I've ever used, but it does pick up a good amount of detail wide open. You know, you can see the skin texture sharpening up there as Lightroom processes the file, and that 61 megapixel sensor picks up a huge amount of information. It is a fantastic sensor, and I think that when you couple this camera with one of the higher end L mount lenses, you're going to be able to produce incredible results, because even with this lens, which isn't really brilliant when it comes to sharpness and detail wide open, you can see just how much detail it picks up. The things I mentioned was that Sigma's color profiles are a lot nicer. I really like the powder blue color profile, and this is a JPEG straight from the camera, and this has the powder blue color profile. I love the colors from this camera. I think Sigma has done a brilliant job, and the way that they render skin tones and backgrounds, I mean, it just has quite a nice look to it. I don't know if everyone's going to like it, but I really, really like the powder blue color profile. Annette loved it as well, and once again, once you correctly focus, you can see just how much detail the sensor is able to pick up. I think that with a sharper lens, this sensor is going to be able to do a great deal more. Finally, here we have some images taken in a more controlled setting, and we're not going to be looking at colors too much because we can't really use Sigma's color profiles in raw files, but I did stop this lens down to f11, and when we zoom in, once Lightroom catches up, you can see that the lens picks up a fantastic amount of detail. And I have to say that this camera, it is fantastic considering just how small and portable it is and how much detail it captures. I mean, this tiny little camera can produce incredible images. If I'm not mistaken, it's the same sensor as the Sony a7R4. So you've got a Sony a7R4 level sensor in a £2,000 camera, which is tiny, fits in your pocket, and you're able to produce ridiculously high resolution files. I just think that's amazing. Finally, we took some images just to test the dynamic range of the sensor as well, and I have to say it is excellent. So this image has been recovered by 5 stops in post, and if we zoom in 1:1, once Lightroom catches up again, you can see the detail is still excellent. There is noise in the image. Obviously, it's been recovered 5 stops in post. It's a DNG file, and I have to say, I mean, there's a little bit of banding there, which is going to cause some issues, but some noise reduction software on this, and it's fine. 5 stops is really, really pushing the boundary in terms of what's reasonable, but even at that level, it's okay. It's not bad at all. There's noise, there's banding, but I think with some noise reduction, this could quite comfortably be taken out, and you're still left with a very, very detailed file. So, conclusions. Now, I never had a chance to play with the original Sigma FP, so I can't really make a direct comparison based on experience, but based on some of the discussions that I've had with people and some of the reviews that I've seen, the Sigma FP was leaning more towards videographers, and the fact that it has a tiny form factor was fine, because you wouldn't necessarily use it just as the small camera. You would build it up, you'd put a cage on it, you'd put attachments on it, and you'd use the Sigma FP as a core to the system or the rig that you're building. For photographers, that's not what photographers generally do. Photographers don't really build rigs in general. What we tend to do is pick up a camera, go out and shoot. That's essentially what we do. We might attach a tripod or some accessories to it, but nothing like what videographers do. So the Sigma FP, because it was leaning more towards videographers, the design of it made sense. However, what they've done is they've used the same design, the same body, the same everything, and they put in a really high resolution sensor, but they've downgraded some of the video features. So the Sigma FPL is now leaning more towards photographers based on the features, because it's more expensive than the FP but has slightly worse video features. So obviously the FP is better for video, and the FPL is leaning more towards photographers with that ridiculously high resolution sensor. The problem is there's a slight disconnect in terms of the way that the body has been designed and the core features. Core features leaning towards photographers, but the body still leaning towards videographers with its terrible ergonomics and, you know, a design that's kind of leaning towards leading you to want to build up a rig. And I think that's where there's a little bit of awkwardness. However, I think this is still a fantastic camera, because if you think about it, this is a camera with potentially the same sensor as the Sony a7R IV, so it's potentially same image quality or similar image quality in a camera body that costs less than £2,000. I don't know how much it is in dollars, I haven't been told that, but about less than £2,000, and it's tiny, ridiculously small. It's possibly, I could be wrong, but if I'm not mistaken, it's the smallest full frame camera on the market, and it has an incredible amount of resolution, fantastic image quality. It's got these color profiles that you can use. I mean, for street photographers, for people out there who want to just go out and shoot and just want a compact camera that isn't going to cost a ridiculous amount, this is brilliant. Some major downside with the design, it's gonna cause a few problems for some people. Some people may hate it, some people may not mind it. I mean, you can add a attachment grip onto the front. I don't know how much of a difference that makes. Based on some discussions I've had, some people say it's terrible, some people say it doesn't make that much of a difference, some people say it's okay. I don't know, I mean, I haven't tried it, but I think that from the concept of it is utterly brilliant. The execution could have been better. I think Sigma may have been better if Sigma kind of redesigned the body a little bit, but I guess if you want to keep the cost down and you want to keep the price similar to the original Sigma FP, then the same body can be used and it just keeps the cost down. So I get why they did it. I just think that if you're aiming this more towards photographers, there were certain things that are probably required. They have done something because they've added a viewfinder to this camera, so that's great. Viewfinder is a little bit cumbersome, a little bit of a pain to shoot with. The major downside of this camera system overall is the fact that it doesn't have a mechanical shutter. And I get that having a mechanical shutter would have increased the size, but it just causes a lot of problems, especially if it's for photographers, because the sync speed on this sensor is only 1/30th of a second. With that kind of a sync speed, flash usage is pretty terrible. So, you know, it's difficult to use flash with this camera, and that's one of the reasons why I had to use continuous lights, just to be able to shoot with higher shutter speeds and so on and so forth. So, you know, it's a bit of a problem if you want to shoot with flash electronic shutter. That's the only major downside, but other than that, if you just want something which is tiny, compact, and produces ridiculously high resolution images with incredible detail, also bearing in mind it's an interchangeable camera which uses L-mount lenses, and some of the L-mount lenses are just wow, I think this camera could be fantastic for a lot of people, but not everyone. It's a very niche system, and also the autofocus isn't that great. But other than that, I think there's definitely a market for this, and I really enjoy shooting with it. Anyway, just want to say thank you so much for watching our video. If you like this video, hit the like button, please subscribe, share this video, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Thank you.